Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. Just a quick reminder here at the top of the show, don't forget to hit that subscribe button or the follow button in your podcast app, whatever it is. That ensures that you won't miss any future episodes. Plus, it also tends to help boost the rankings. So why not go ahead and do that? Support the show absolutely for free. And you're also not going to miss any future episodes. So if you're listening to me, odds are you like what I'm doing. So why not go ahead and do that? By the way, just a reminder, this is technically a monthly podcast, but pretty much always I release 2 episodes a month on the 1st and the 15th. So just keep an eye out for new episodes around those times, the 1st and the 15th of the month. But again, if you subscribe, then you won't really have to keep an eye out because they'll just show up magically in your device, right? So go ahead and do that. But anyway, enough self-promotion. Let's get into today's episode. My guest today is Alex K.T. Martin. He is a senior writer for the Japan Times. He writes feature stories for the Japan Times. And recently, he published an epic, massive, incredible 5-part series about the Japanese wolf. It's called In Search of Japan's Lost Wolves. I highly recommend it. It's long, but it's super interesting. It's 5 parts, and each part focuses on a different aspect of this whole, thing about the Japanese wolf. Like there's people hunting for the wolves, and not like hunting as in like trying to shoot them down, but rather like trying to find this supposedly extinct animal because it's considered to be extinct. It's been considered to be extinct since 1905 when the last specimen was captured and killed. But throughout the years, many different individuals have said, I saw it, or I took a picture of it, etc., but they haven't been able to capture one and prove without a shadow of a doubt that it still exists. Now, anyway, so some of these articles focus on these individuals, other people, like you're going to get to hear today, like people trying to reintroduce wolves, and different problems with Japan not having wolves, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of really interesting aspects to this story, and this massive series of articles covers it all. Super interesting. Go check it out. Link in the show notes. Again, it's by Alex K.T. Martin, wonderful writer. So we're going to talk about all that stuff, plus a couple other things. But anyway, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Alex K.T. Martin.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
Okay, so here's maybe a little bit of a random question, but would the Japanese wolf be considered a cryptid?
That's a good question. Some researchers, especially overseas, sort of view the animal as a cryptid. But most folks based in Japan who are searching for the animal don't. I think perhaps it's a matter of just distance, and, which sort of changes the conception of the animal. But I think it's a good question because can it be aligned next to Bigfoot or other cryptids, famous cryptids? It's yes or no, perhaps. But the animal did actually exist, at least until a century ago. So that's sort of different from perhaps the Yeti or the Bigfoot. So there's no straight answer for that, but it's sort of a yes and no thing, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. Perspective and I guess level of conviction.
Yeah. I mean, for folks, who think that, there's no way, the wolf is still around in Japan, then yeah, it's a cryptid. For others who think, that, maybe there is, or maybe there's like a descendant hybrid sort of breed still around, then it's no. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's go. Let's take it back to the beginning for you.
Sure.
So I know you've been working on this for a long time. I did listen to an episode that you were on the Deep Dive Japan's podcast. That was episode 19, if I remember correctly, or 18 or 19, I think. But fun episode. And you talk a little bit about kind of, I think, you mentioned how it started for you and with your mom's friend or something like that. Is that how this whole interest in the Japanese wolf got started?
Yeah. So it was very random. So I'm half Japanese, or how should I? My father's American, my mother's Japanese, and I grew up in Tokyo. And my mother, after she retired, she bought a sort of a mountain house up in Chichibu, which is around, I don't know, 70 minutes by train from Tokyo. It's sort of a mountainous area in northwestern Saitama Prefecture, which is the prefecture next to Tokyo. Anyway, so she has this house, and she started making local friends. And one of her friends, Rina Kambayashi, a lady in her 50s, told her, this was, I think, late 2018, I think. It was in December, I think. Well, anyway, Rina claimed that she saw a wolf outside her house by a small pond in her garden. And she sort of panicked, and she went inside the house to pick up her camera, and she came out, and by the time the wolf or the dog was gone. And she called my mother up and said that, oh, hey, my mom's Hideko, by the way. Hideko, I saw a wolf outside my house, by the garden. And my mom was, she's, well, there's no way there's a wolf, in Chichibu or anywhere in Japan. In fact, it's been considered since 1905. So she forgot about this story, and then she told me about it a few months later. I think it was in early 2019. I was dropping by her Tokyo home, and she sort of recounted this episode. I sort of, something sort of clicked, and, I at that point, I wasn't even aware that the wolf was extinct in Japan. I'm not like a wildlife person to begin with. I was raised in the city, so my knowledge on wildlife animals, etc., is not very deep. So, but I sort of Googled the Japanese wolf and realized that it's been gone for over a century. And then I sort of, recounted, remembered what my mom said about this, her friend. And I thought, this could be an interesting sort of, story to sort of, start looking into. And I started Googling, and I immediately found this blog run by a man called Hiroshi Yagi, who I would later find out is quite famous in, this field. He's been searching for the wolf for half a century, for about 50 years now. So I, contacted this guy. He sent him an email and said that, hey, I'm this person, and my mother, who has a house in Chichibu, claims that her friend saw a wolf. And he responded, and he apparently knew my mother's neighbor in Chichibu. So we sort of had that connection. And we decided to meet up in Chichibu, and we went over to Rina Kambayashi's home and sort of walked around her garden and sort of checked out the locations where she saw the animal. And, he's been doing this for ages now. I think he's met a few hundred people who claims to have seen wolf-like animals in Japan. So he knew what he was doing. So he would ask what's the head shape or the skull shape, or the height, the shoulder height, the color of the fur, et cetera, et cetera. And, he told me that, this sort of matches the description of, the wolf-like animal that he's been searching for. And I found that very interesting. I started looking into the history of the Japanese wolf, how it went extinct. And then I realized that Chichibu is actually a sort of a mecca for wolf worship in Japan. The animal was worshipped, all over in different areas in Japan, like the Kii Peninsula or southern Nagano, in different areas. But Chichibu still has shrines dedicated to the wolves. The famous one is called Mitsumine Shrine up in the mountains. If you go there, you would see, dozens of these stone wolf statues in the premises. And it's a very it's a religion, sort of a folk religion that's still actually alive and practiced in that area. So I figured this was really fascinating for me because I like history and sort of mythology and stuff like that. So I started looking into that and started buying books and sort of tracking the history of Chichibu and its wolf worship. And then sort of then there's, Hiroshi Yagi and people like him who are sort of actually searching in the mountains of Chichibu. And all these are sort of not really connected, but they are in the sort of broad sense that, this is all about, the Japanese wolf.
Sure.
Anyway, sorry, I rambled. But
no, that's fine. I do want to ask you a little bit more about Hiroshi Yagi. He seems like a very interesting person. But before we get into that, I'm a little bit curious about how, in terms of writing this story? Like, how does that work? Do you say like, oh, this lady that knows my mom saw this wolf. Hey, Japan Times, I guess you were already working for them at the time. And you go like, hey, can I write a story on this? And they were interested. And then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Pretty much. We're pretty sort of lenient when it comes to pitching story ideas. And if a reporter seems to have something, editors are pretty open to sort of let them do what they want to do. Plus, I had the advantage of having, my mother's house in Chichibu, so I can go there and spend nights without using the company's expense and stuff like that.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was an advantage. And, I think, I mean, the modern day sighting itself was sort of I wouldn't call it a news peg because it's not news, but it was something to sort of like start something on. I wasn't expecting to be following this story for, until now. I wrote an initial story back in May 2019, and I thought I was done with it at that point, but then it sort of just kept on going. Mostly because of Hiroshi Yagi, we kept in touch, and he would update me on, his most recent discoveries. And the Japanese television's been sort of, once in a while they would run something on the Japanese wolf and, modern day sightings, stuff like that. So there's sort of a steady stream of information that keeps on trickling in. And so I decided to sort of just pursue the story, after the initial story. And, I just went up to, talk to Shinto priests or scientists, zoologists, and sort of get a comprehensive sort of view on this animal. Not just the people who are searching for the extinct beast, but more sort of like DNA analysis stuff, science, zoology, and obviously the mythology and religion. And,
you ended up with this huge 5-part series. I mean, it's
right.
massive and it's amazing. Did you think it was going to be 5 parts? What were you thinking when you started on this second leg of your coverage?
Right. So initially I pitched it as a 10-part series, actually.
Wow.
But each series, each story wouldn't be this long, as the one I produced.
Yeah, they are lengthy.
Yeah, they are lengthy. So in the end, it's probably, came out around the same amount of words that I was initially thinking of. But I was thinking like, maybe 1,000-word story released every month or something, that would chronicle this adventure. But it turned into a 5-part series released almost at once, over a week.
Well, they're really enjoyable to read. I got through all of them and I enjoyed it, learned a lot.
Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about then Hiroshi Yagi? So
sure.
So I think he was already frequenting the Chichibu area because of those connections to the Japanese wolf, right? Like he's already pretty familiar with the area?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So he doesn't come from Chichibu. He was born in Niigata prefecture, which is sort of up north it's over by the Japan Sea, Sea of Japan, I guess. And he was in the mountaineering club during high school. So he loved the mountains. He would just, go up trekking to the big mountains in Niigata and elsewhere nearby. And then he joined a company called Kokudo, which is now defunct, but they were sort of they were trying to sort of renovate this mountain called Mount Naeba into a ski resort. But this was before that. So he was tending to this mountain huts. In Japanese, you would call it Yamagoya no bannin. Bannin is sort of I can't really give a nice English translation for that. But anyway, he was he was working for these mountain huts, and he would sort of serve meals and sort of tend to the climbers' needs, etc. And one night he was carrying a big load of rice with another friend of his up to the mountain hut on the top of the mountain. And I think they got tired and they took a small break around a little past midnight. And they were sort of dozing off when he heard successive howls, like, ooh, 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 like really right by him. And he freaked out pretty much. And I think it's sort of like an instinctive fear that people feel when they are close to wildlife predators. Anyway, so he woke up his friend and they left the rice, where it was, and they, instead of going up to the hut, there's another hut down below. So they basically ran back to where they came from, and spent the night there. And anyway, this experience sort of like left a big sort of impression on him. I think he was like 19 at that time. It was pretty young.
Was this in 1969?
This is 1969. Yes, this is the
right.
initial,
Yeah. I remember you mentioned like the moon landing was around that time.
Right. I think
this is how long this guy has been at it. In a way,
yeah.
I mean, he didn't get super into it right away, right? But that's kind of the genesis of his whole story.
Indeed, that's the genesis.
Yeah.
I think it was a week after the moon landing or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he remembers it, because the news was all about Neil Armstrong and the Apollo landing. Anyway, so life goes on, and he didn't really talk about his sort of experience, because people would laugh at him if he told them that he heard a wolf howl, because even at that point the wolf was already considered extinct, right? And then I think but he wanted to become a mountain guide, so he took these special lessons for them, and he did his stuff up in Mount Fuji and sort of in winter mountains and all that. But I think he had a big accident once, and he decided that maybe mountain guide is not my thing. So he moved on, and he worked for an outdoor gear maker. And at some point, he read a newspaper article about. I think I have this guy's book. I'm looking at my library. There's a former Asahi Shimbun reporter called, what's his name? Inosuke Hida. So he's already passed away a long time ago. But anyway, he spent 18 years sort of tracking the Japanese wolf in the mountains of Japan. And I think he read a story about this guy, who's looking for a supposedly extinct animal. And that sort of gave him confidence, I think, that, hey, maybe that howl I heard, a few years back, maybe that was the real thing. So he started sort of exploring and digging out sort of other material about the search. And there are, quite a lot of number of people over the past century who's been looking for the Japanese wolf in the mountains. So these are not, major publications, but if you look around, you would find, small books or pamphlets documenting these people. So I think started gathering information and then sort of looking into wolf mythology and history. And at that point, he moved over to a city in Saitama called Ageo. It's sort of a suburban sprawl outside of Tokyo. And it's in the same prefecture as where Chichibu is, which is the closest wolf worshipping area in the Kanto Plains, I think. So he started going to Chichibu and visiting Mitsumine Shrine, the wolf worshipping shrine, and people, like-minded people would gather, and they would host sort of like forums where they would exchange information about the Japanese wolf. And he would visit sort of mountain hamlets and talk to old residents in villages and ask them, if they have specimens of the Japanese wolf, like whether it be fur or skulls or bone fragments, etc. And he actually discovered a Japanese wolf fur owned by the Uchida household in Chichibu. This was back in 1995 or something, I think. I might be wrong. Anyway, so he's sort of an independent researcher. He's not an academic, but he sort of began making actual discoveries, scientific discoveries, stuff like that. And then comes 1996, when he actually encounters an animal that resembles the Japanese wolf. Right.
Those are like the 19 photos, I think, right? That he ends up taking?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. And then, of course, that kind of revived it a little bit. And then somebody else, it was like a school principal, also took some photos, right?
That's correct.
And then both of them also kind of got some backlash, I think, right? Like some people saying like, no, that's not a wolf, you're stupid. Like basically.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but most academics and scientists deny the possibility that, an animal considered extinct in 1905 is still around for various reasons, obvious reasons too. But then when Yagi, so he was, driving through this mountain road in Chichibu, or near Chichibu, on October 14th, 1996, around 4 p.m., I think. And then he came upon, actually, I think in the end, he saw 3 dog-like, wolf-like animals, but he was able to capture one on camera, which is the famous 19 photographs that you see in my stories and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And he took it to various academics, but most said that, you can't really tell what this animal is. It looks like a dog. It sort of looks like a wolf too, but, who knows, right? But there was one famous zoologist called Imaizumi-san, who used to be, I think, the head of the zoological department at the National Science Museum in Japan. Anyway, so he's a very keen sort of wolf researcher, and he compared the photographs to the original type specimen of the Japanese wolf. That's right now it's in the Netherlands at the Leiden Museum of. I forgot the official name of the museum, but anyway, that's the specimen that people use to sort of analyze other Japanese wolf specimens. And he said, he found like over a dozen similarities with the photographs and this type specimen, and said that there's a very high possibility that this is actually the Japanese wolf, which obviously gave Yagi hope and sort of fueled his drive, and this animal was named Chichibu Yaken. Yaken is Japanese for a wild dog, and so ever since, Yagi's been searching for the Chichibu Yaken in the mountains of mostly Chichibu. Not because there aren't any wolf sightings elsewhere, but because I think he's almost a one-man band. He has a small NPO and he has a couple of people, but in terms of he can't really afford going to other islands in Japan frequently. Whereas Chichibu, he can just drive up there in a couple of hours and get there. So I think that's his main field.
So, I mean, for the most part now, or at least for the past, I don't know, couple decades, it seems like he puts cameras and just collects the footage and then I guess looks it over, and it's kind of like a repetition and repetition. Just keep going with that. Yeah.
That's the primary way he goes about it. So ideally he would want to capture the animal on video in one of his trail cams. He has about 70 set up in the in Chichibu and Okutama region. The other way to do it is to record wolf howls. So I think before modern trail cams were available for a reasonable price, he would head up to the mountains and sort of play recordings of wolf howls into the mountains, so he can perhaps hear wolf howls coming back from actual animals. This is what he used to do. And then, trail cameras came and they became more affordable. So he began setting those up. But so far, he hasn't sort of found any footage that really sort of clearly sort of identifies a wolf-like animal yet. So, although he did sort of pick up a howl at some point, I think it's like 2-3 years ago, and he took it to the Japan Acoustics Lab in Shibuya, and they compared it to a wolf howl of I think a Eurasian wolf that's in the zoo in Hokkaido, and the frequency was very close. So, but still, these fragments of information is gives hope, but is that the decisive sort of proof that the animal is alive? Probably not. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah. And I mean, currently he's around 70 years old, right? And and I mean, there's only so long you can go on with that sort of work. So, I mean, is there any, did you come across any sort of people that were going to take over the mantle and that were younger than him?
I think, well, he does have a sort of a sidekick, I should say, perhaps, or his protege, Kadoyoshi Mura-san, who's in his 50s, much younger than Yagi-san, and he almost every week tags along with Yagi up into the mountains, so he knows where the cameras are and he knows what to do, and he helps Yagi out in sort of going over the footage. So I would assume he would be the first person to sort of take over if there's a day that Yagi-san might no longer be able to head up to the mountains. Besides that, I don't know. Every time, for example, a TV news segment runs something about the search, or a book mentions the search, I think there's a certain portion of the population who are sort of interested and intrigued by the search. So I think there is the potential that this could his Yagi's search and his friend's search can sort of resonate to a wider audience. perhaps. But in terms of, actually dedicating time and money into going into the mountains and looking for wolves, you really need to be dedicated to do that, obviously, because, you're not going to be getting paid for anything.
Just purely my own personal curiosity, but how would you describe Yagi-san? Like, because there's this kind of image of, especially when you're talking about cryptids or these kind, or in the case of the wolf, right? Like the old man that's never going to be happy because he's always looking for the white whale kind of like image.
Right.
Is he like a cranky old man? Is he just a happy guy that loves being in nature? Like, what's your impression of him?
He's definitely not a cranky old man. He's sort of a humorous guy.
That's wonderful.
He always likes to make these, in Japanese you call it oyaji gyagu, sort of.
I love that.
I love that. Sort of stupid jokes, but, he's also very passionate, obviously. So once, if it's, let's say a reader sends me, something about a potential sighting and I sort of relay it over to him, he would immediately give me a call and start asking, the details of what I heard. So is generally a sort of a, humorous sort of but intense guy.
Sure.
Definitely not laid back. He's very quick in terms of how his mind works and the general sort of feeling that you get from him.
No, that's wonderful. No, I'm glad to hear that. I love bad puns in Japanese. So.
Right.
So, speaking of other kind of passionate individuals, there's another person that you talk about in the article series that he wants to bring wolves into Japan because there's problems with no natural predators being there and like overpopulation of things like deer and whatnot. So there's an argument to be made. But could you tell us a little bit about this individual and kind of like what he's been working on?
Yeah, I think you're talking about Mr. Naoki Maruyama, who's the
I think so. Yeah.
who's the founder of the Japan Wolf Association. So he's been sort of appealing to the public through presentations, speeches. He's released numerous books, explaining the necessity and the reasoning behind sort of reintroducing wolves into Japan. However, it's been sort of difficult because. Well, first of all, the wolf has been considered extinct for a century. So there's no sort of modern sort of experience among Japanese of actually, living close to the apex predator. Secondly, the general sort of impression that at least the Japanese harbor towards the wolf is that it's a dangerous animal. So, there was an interesting story he told me. I think this was, when was this? This was about 2 decades ago, I guess. So he was asked to give a lecture in Nikko, which is a city in Tochigi Prefecture. And on that morning, he got this phone call from a mother, a very angry mother in Tochigi, who read a newspaper article about this gathering that he was supposed to go to make this speech. And she sort of screamed at him on the phone, said that, what if, my child is attacked by wolves when he or she is commuting to school? And he was like, and then he went over to Nikko and he sort of arrived at the office or wherever he was supposed to give his presentation. And then he noticed these sound trucks parked outside. The right wing nationalist sound trucks.
Yeah. The big loud black trucks usually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, the guys wearing sort of military uniforms and sort of, with the Japanese flag and all that. Anyway, they were sort of like, telling him that, why are you trying to introduce foreign wolves, to a nation that was home to the Japanese wolf, blah, blah, blah. And so, there's various different takes to, how people sort of, think about the wolf. There is that nationalist element to it as well, obviously. Then there's the fear towards the animal, just because it's a wolf, obviously. And these things combined, it's been making it very difficult for him to sort of, convince, the majority of the public that, having wolves would be beneficial. Obviously, because Japan's been seeing this rise in deer and wild boar all over the place, and they're really sort of eating up crops and causing a lot of damage to the ecosystem here. So, obviously, if you reintroduce wolves, it's the predator, and perhaps, if a nice cycle can be created, some of this issues could be resolved. But at the same time, Japan's, gone through a huge change over the past century. Obviously, it's gone through the war, then during the latter part of the 20th century, rapid sort of urban development. So the distance between the mountains and cities have narrowed quite a lot. So if you go to Chichibu, it's a mountain ring city, but you step out of the city and just go walking for a little bit and then you hit the mountains. So the distance between where people are living and where animals are living is very close. And what if, and wolves are primarily animals that don't bother human beings, according to animal experts. But if they're so close, and there's no what do you call no one can say that they can't just come out and sort of scavenge for human food, leftovers and whatnot, stuff like that. So it's been difficult for him, I think.
It's tough. I mean, especially these past couple of years, I've been seeing so many stories about bears, for example, right?
Right.
Like bears coming into, populated areas, and there's been some pretty significant incidents. I think one ended up in a mall in Ishikawa too. So,
right.
I mean, yes, bears don't naturally attack humans. They would rather be somewhere else, but these things happen, right? Especially nowadays, like you're saying. Yeah. So.
And, if you have a huge national park like Yellowstone, it's a different story. You can actually leave them be. But in Japan, although it is very mountainous, as I mentioned, the distance, the landmass is much smaller than, a country like the U.S. or China, for example. So, So far, the association's been conducting sort of regular surveys, I think. And the general population, the results of the survey sort of indicate that people are sort of loosening up towards the concept, but it's still not, at that level where, they're going to be, okay, let's reintroduce wolves.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many aspects to this story that I could ask you about, but I do. How about, I think I'll put it to you this way. What part of this massive story kind of stuck with you the most, resonated with you the most, or is most memorable to you, or you like the most, or something that stood out to you about this whole thing that you've been working on? Could you tell me something? Sure.
I mean, I think it just goes back to the initial sort of incident where I heard about my mother's friend who claims to have seen a wolf. The fact that an animal that's considered extinct for over a century resurfacing in the 21st century, that itself was sort of it's romantic, it's fascinating. And even if, it's just some random sighting that doesn't amount to anything, the possibility itself was, very exhilarating for myself. And then meeting people like Yagi who are, dead serious about, the wolf's existence and who are dedicating their lives. This is not for money, right? This is entirely passion. And things like that, it sort of, strangely gives me hope, in this very sort of materialistic society,
I get that.
Yeah. And I think, it's a story that sort of resonates, not just because of the possibility of the wolf being alive or not, but, the fact that there are people like him, who are just really dedicating their time and efforts and money and mind for this this search. And it's just I don't know, it's I wish to be honest, I wish I could be like Yagi, if I can sort of
I get it, yeah,
but so it's sort of I think it's just attracted to people like him, who are, as you mentioned earlier, the white whale searcher. Anyway, maybe I didn't answer your question, but
no, I get it, and I have that same kind of fascination with individuals like that, where it's like, you want to, of course, you want to kind of understand their thinking, but you also just kind of want to be around them and see them kind of fighting for what they're trying to accomplish. And it's a goal that doesn't hurt anyone. It's just a nice thing. And if they accomplish their goal, it's like, hey, we're all happy. And if they don't, well, whatever, they had fun doing it, and we're all still happy. So
You're
nothing wrong with a story like that.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So just to kind of close things off, we're going to move a little bit away, or very much away, I guess, from the Japanese wolf. But I happened to read an article that you just posted as of this conversation, which is, what is it? We're in the middle of August. So, we're writing about kind of Tokyo post Olympics, right? Like what
Right.
kind of things, how things are looking moving past the Olympics, because I think like, the 1964 Olympics were so significant for Japan, and, that only helped continue the acceleration of progress for Japan. But what are you seeing in your research and your writing? Did the Tokyo Olympics do something? How are people looking at it and moving forward?
Right. Well, I think in terms of Olympics legacy, this one's going to be very hard to define because Tokyo's already a modern metropolis. We did build a few new stadiums for the Olympics, but it's nothing compared to the massive urban development that was going on back in 1964. So infrastructure-wise, there's not much to sort of say that that Tokyo 2020 left for Tokyo. And then obviously it's a pandemic game, so there were almost no spectators, meaning it was like any other television Olympics that the Japanese would see in any other year when the Olympics games are hosted. So in terms of what this Olympics leaves for Japan and Tokyo, I'm afraid there's nothing much. Perhaps,
I suspected that. Yeah,
yeah.
Sadly,
perhaps it would be a guideline for hosting these mega events during a pandemic. Looking forward,
an example. It's certainly an example,
right?
Yeah.
Although obviously there's the debate as to whether to, it's right to host it in the first place, right? So I think a lot of residents here, including myself, I mean, I wasn't too excited about, sort of this games to begin with. I was more personally, I was sort of doubtful as to whether we really need to do this, right? I mean, it's obviously for corporate sponsors, the IOC, it's a monetized commercial event. It's great to see athletes, breaking records and, giving their everything to do that. And that's, but then again, do we really had to do it now? So,
that's the ultimate question. Something interesting that I saw that you highlighted in the first part, at least that I read, was kind of like the environment, how like kind of this whole, COVID and pandemic and seems to have raised an awareness or made people more kind of interested in environmental issues and kind of the climate change and all this kind of stuff and activism with younger people.
Right. I mean, it's not directly related to the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, but see, I didn't go to a Japanese school, so I can't really tell from experience. But I hear that the high schools in Japan now they actually incorporate what's that, SDGs?
The UN kind
sustainable,
of
into their education system. So a lot of youth now, they're actually aware of the climate crisis, global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So I think it's more natural for them to sort of think about what's happening around in their world. Compared to, folks from a few generations back who experienced the 1964 Olympics when, it was all about pollution and industrialization. And obviously, global warming is a thing. The UN just released that big report a few days ago, I think. The IPCC, was it? About, how temperatures are going to rise over the next few decades. So I think, environmental consciousness, not just among Japanese, but, people around the world, especially among the younger generation, they're much more conscious about what's happening and sort of interested in ways to sort of, help out in alleviating some of the environmental pressure. So one of the kids I talked to, he was 17 and he said he went vegan last year. And I was like, wow, I mean, how do you keep it up? And he said he convinced his parents and his younger brother in middle school to also go vegan. So his entire family is vegan. I was like, wow,
You don't hear that often in Japan.
But he said that, at least in Tokyo, it's easier to find sort of vegan serving restaurants. If this was, perhaps a village out in the countryside, I think it might have been more, or Shibu, it might be more difficult to sort of, or actually, I don't know, if you're raising your own vegetables.
True, if you have a little, kind of farm kind of thing, maybe.
So, and I talked to, officials that working for the Tokyo metropolitan government, and they just released, I think this was back in March, or May, I forgot, a very 400-page booklet on their plans to sort of change Tokyo into a more green city, compact green city, because the population of Japan has been falling. Tokyo is the only, I think, city, or one of the only cities in Japan that's been experiencing more population because people are just sucked in. But even in Tokyo, I think the population is going to peak out in 2025, 4 years from now. And then it's going to start falling. It's going to hit like 11 million, which is 3 million down from what we have now in about 2000, I don't know, in a couple of decades from here.
Sure.
And, the population's graying really fast. Japan is the oldest nation in Japan, in the world. So, all that combined, do we all need all this massive infrastructure? Do we want, all the resources centered in Tokyo? How are we going to manage, old age pension systems when, the working population is dwindling, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Japan's entering an entirely different phase from, what was happening back in 1964. So it's a different world. It's a different country. It's a different sort of growth trajectory. It's a different vision, I think, that the country needs to sort of work on, and it is working on. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to tie it back to the wolf, so we have the people leaving, the countryside to go to the cities, and then you have these basically abandoned towns where the deer and the boar are like overtaking the areas, and they're just growing in population. And then you have the hunters that are aging too, so you have less hunters, and then the animals there's more and more animals too. So it's this, loop, I guess, right?
It's a loop, yes, exactly. And I don't think there's any single way to sort of solve the problem. Or,
bring back wolves.
Bring back wolves.
That'll fix everything.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's a really tough problem, but,
and the thing is, so the Japanese wolf is some researchers are fascinated with the animal because, it's so different from other gray wolf populations.
It's like smaller too, right? Like
it's
it looks
very
a
small.
bit different, right? Yeah.
It's one of the smallest wolves found in the world, or was in the world. It's about the size of a shikoku or so. So if you were to actually, see a Japanese wolf in the forest, for example, size-wise, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a regular Japanese dog, perhaps. It obviously has different sort of features, fangs and head shape, and the general sort of aura would be different. It's a predator. But I think that's one reason why there's so many people who are still, searching for the wolf, because there's numerous sightings every year from all parts of the country saying that I've seen a wolf here, or I've sort of heard a howl here there. And I think one reason why the search is ongoing even after a century after its supposed demise is that the wolf's so small to begin with. It sort of raises the possibility that this a random forest encounter could have been with an actual thing. So anyway, it sort of adds to the, if this was, a big gray wolf, then, it'll be easier to
dismiss, I guess. Yeah. True. Yeah. And of course it raises that whole thing. Is it a dog? Is it, you can always kind of raise that question mark when people show you the picture or whatever. It's like, no, it's just a dog, because it's not as clear cut as if it were to be a gray wolf.
Sure.
But yeah, of course I will include links to the articles we talked about, the whole series. Wonderful series. Thank you so much for making time to talk. I had a wonderful time, and thank you for writing that series. I learned a great deal. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And hopefully I can sort of update the stories with more new findings.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Break the story. Yagi-san found the wolf.
Yeah, that'll be the best way to wrap it up.
Yeah. We need some good news every once in a while, right? The feature is called In Search of Japan's Lost Wolves. Links will be in the show notes for the articles that we talked about, but I will include a link specifically to the landing page where you can then go to all 5 different articles of this larger feature about the Japanese wolf that Alex wrote. Again, highly recommend it. Go check it out. And also, if you want to take a listen to that episode of the Japan Times podcast, it's called Deep Dive, and that episode where Alex was on talking about the Japanese wolf, then I will include a link in the show notes as well. That was a fun episode that touches on some aspects of the story that we didn't get to touch on today. So definitely worth a listen as well. If you have any questions or comments, send them over to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Again, remember to subscribe, the whole thing, rate and review, tell a friend about the show, seriously does help a lot. Also, don't forget to follow on Facebook and Twitter at Japankyo News. And thank you so much to Unomi for providing the opening and closing song. If you want to support the show when you're doing any shopping on Amazon, make sure to use japankyo.com/Amazon. Every little bit helps, doesn't cost you anything extra. So keep that in mind, japankyo.com/Amazon, japankyo.com/Amazon. And thank you so much to everybody who has been using that link. It's been just amazing seeing people actually use the link because apparently you guys care enough to do that. So thank you. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of Ichimon Japan, the other Japan-focused podcast that I do. That one is all about these interesting places in Japan that are known for having either beautiful or ugly women. I won't get into a whole thing about that because that's a long story in and of itself. But if that sounds weird or interesting to you, then go check out Ichimon Japan episode 50. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!